Hi, I'm Tristan, and this is Thinking About Politics. So today, we're thinking about Masa Amini, a young woman who was killed by the Iranian fashion police in September of 2022. The murder of this young woman has kicked off nationwide protests across Iran. The bravery of these women and other protesters is remarkable for a number of reasons. And when you put this in its historical context, it gives you a reason to sort of think that there's cause for optimism in Iran's future. So this really has me thinking, a bunch of different thoughts, really. And rather than find some thread to weave them all together with, I don't know, just lay them out for you in no particular fashion here. So anyway, here we go. America bad? Yeah, so is this like America's fault? I mean, the Ayatollah seems to think so, but he tends to think that all dissatisfaction with his government is caused by boogeymen in Britain or the United States. Conveniently, that lets his government off the hook for all sorts of stuff like diverting water supplies from the eastern areas into the more wealthy western regions. That's a tough one to blame on the United States, but by all means. But it's probably disingenuous to say that the United States doesn't play any role at all in creating the current state of affairs. And not just the United States, but other imperialist powers that took colonies and tried to divvy up the globe throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th and 20th century, when countries like France and Britain and Russia carved up a lot of the globe for themselves. Latecomers like Japan and the United States also joined the party. As you can imagine, in areas that were colonized or were subject to imperialism, those populations are pretty proud of their efforts to resist foreign influence. The Iranian people, for instance, were fighting against Russian encroachment on their territory in the 1800s, and then in the early 20th century had to turn around and deal with the British exploiting their oil reserves. And while, they were never an outright colony, those imperial powers were able to use the politics of Iran to get what they wanted. In the early 20th century, a constitutional monarchy was founded in Iran, and the British were experts at using subterfuge and political intrigue to play petty monarchs off of indigenous parliaments to extract maximum concessions. And that's exactly what they did here. Through the Iranian king, the Shah, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was able to extract huge concessions. This was a source of wealth that was effectively denied to the Iranian people. And this is the situation into which the United States enters. You have a group of people in Iran who have been fighting against foreign invasion for hundreds of years at this point. Their local leaders have been bought off time and time again. Oh yeah, and those dominating foreign powers tend to be like non-Muslim. So you could imagine such a people might be very proud about resisting the influence of these foreign nations, and by sticking to their religious cultural roots. Right? So anyway, by the 1950s, Mohammad Mossadegh, this guy's elected to prime minister. And Mossadegh was a reformer. He wanted to raise the standard of living for regular Iranians. And doing so was going to take some money. Schools, public health, roads, all the good stuff. In order to do this, he was going to have to cancel the concessions that the king had made to the British. Check out this line from a speech I found in 1951. Long years of negotiations with foreign countries have yielded no results thus far. With the oil revenues, we could meet our entire budget and combat poverty, disease, and backwardness among our people. Another important consideration is that by the elimination of the power of the British company, we would also eliminate corruption and intrigue by means of which the internal affairs of our country have been influenced. Once this tutelage has ceased, Iran will have achieved its economic and political independence. The Iranian state prefers to take over the production of petroleum itself. The company should do nothing else but return its property to its rightful owners. Quick note, I found this quote on Wikipedia, and it's cited to this. There's some other sources that seem to cite to this exact quote as well, but I was unable to find the book or verify it myself. That would have required going to a library and leaving my basement and Huh. No. But just take that for what it's worth. It's an important note. So, because Mohammad Mossadegh was threatening to nationalize the petroleum industry, and because 1951 happened to be a fever pitch year for Cold War hysteria and the fear of spreading communism, the US and the UK teamed up to overthrow the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh and install the Shah as essentially an absolute ruler. That, that's how the leaders of the free world snuffed out a culturally authentic democracy and government reformer who threatened to help the common people. So, like 20 years later, when the Iranian Revolution rolls through and removes the Shah, you can kind of view that as a continuation of this fight that the Iranian people have been able to put up against foreign domination, against imperialism. And one way to express your dissatisfaction with the colonizers is to reject that culture, to adhere more closely to those traditional, maybe religious cultural beliefs. Some folks may argue that the brutal Islamicist rule that came about after the Iranian Revolution is a direct result of foreign intervention, and it was almost sort of necessary if you're going to defend against, Western imperialism. I kind of have a response to that, and that is, gee, wow, you're really taking away agency from the people on the ground. I mean, the religious conservatives in Iran made the decision to murder other Iranians for political reasons, not other, like, Americans. Plus, it also seems kind of patronizing for, like, Western middle class people to say, like, oh, don't worry, it's not your fault. Imperialism made you do it. It's really imperialism's fault. And the big bad USA. You really didn't want to murder all those people. You're only doing it because, like, countries and history exist. It's like a bad explanation for me. I don't know. But I do think it's totally fair to say that the empowerment of the Ayatollah is another bad effect of imperialism, and that the United States definitely did an imperialism to Iran. No, imperialism. It's always bad, man. It's not a good thing. Really sorry about the imperialism thing. What's the deal with the headscarf anyway? So, is the hijab really a religious thing? Like, what is the basis, the religious basis, for having women cover their hair in a special hat? The practicing of veiling women definitely predates Islam. Like, it exists in the Jewish culture and in the Christian culture and in all sorts of other cultures. It's certainly not one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Like, and it's sort of helpful to look at the history of the law in Iran and how where this headscarf requirement came from. The Shah passed a law relative to the hijab, making it illegal to publicly wear the headscarf from like 1936 to 1941. So a lot of people were voluntarily wearing the headscarf, and as you can imagine, especially after the Shah made and rescinded that law, at least had its political dimension. Under Islamic rule, the hijab became mandatory in 1983, and the religious justifications for it seem to be pretty scant. The political justifications, however, pretty manifest, right? It's a way for the state of Iran to protect in law its conservative culture. So, flash forward to September 2022, and the Iranian fashion police are murdering a girl, 22 years of age, for not wearing her headscarf the right way. A law that has little to do with has nothing to do with public safety, and little to do with religion, and everything to do with the battles against imperialism from like the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. It's just, why? Why? It's so goddamn irrational. Why? And maybe that's like a good segue to another point. Theocracies are irrational. Theocracies are incapable of making rational decisions over the long term. And I hope you foolish Christian nationalists in the United States are paying attention to what's happening in Iran. This is what you get when you get religious rule. Just mark my words. Ultimately, whatever the benefits of an individual religion, and I am firmly convinced that each and every one of them has something of value to offer us, no holy book will ever be good enough to sufficiently lay out a form of government. No true prophet would ever submit to be a prince, for them to be elected president would be profane. Governments are ultimately organized around the consent of the governed, and the more rationally you can hammer out your government and its laws and its processes, the better it is for everybody. When you try to obscure that real fact with a lot of window dressing about talking to God or knowing the objective good and evil of the universe, things get a little confused. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is the divine guidance of one and only one religion that provides the basis for all of its law. And under that theocratic government, as with all theocratic governments, devotion to the state and obedience to the state becomes conflated with obedience and submission to the will of God. And ultimately, it is people who run the affairs of state. It's not God. It's just people. It's like a pretty profane thing if you're a religious person. At least it should be. In the Islamic Republic, the supreme leader who holds most power is elected by an assembly of experts, most of whom are appointed by the supreme leader. This council of experts is made up of religious and moral scholars. Similarly, if you want to run for office in Iran, you need to be approved by a council of guardians, another board of clerics who guards who can get elected to office. And even if you get elected to office and pass a law, that same council of guardians gets to review your law and can say it goes against Sharia, against Islam, against the will of God. So both of these bodies make it pretty hard for Iran to reform too much or too quickly. And as a result, any effort to change the government, to withdraw the consent of the governed and really reorganize society, it's going to be met with irrational opposition. So it's going to require a real inhuman amount of bravery for people to overcome. Which, that brings me to my next point. Hope for the nation of Iran. So you want to see what it looks like when the consent of the governed gets withdrawn? Awesome. I am no expert, but it seems to me that the people of Iran have been fighting against foreign domination and corrupt leaders for hundreds of years. The nation of Iran was affected by American and British and Russian imperialism, and always for the worst. But after 30 years of the Islamic Republic, are people feeling freer? Is the foreign domination gone? Are the corrupt leaders out of jobs? Ultimately, there is such great hope for the nation of Iran because it is a culturally authentic republic, because its people have so much to offer, and because they are willing to engage in this fight, which is the fight for freedom. So, I have no illusions. I don't think the Iranian regime is necessarily going to topple, and it may not really be able to reform itself. The road to change may still be longer and harder. And this is a government that has not been afraid in the past of murdering thousands of people on, all at once to maintain its grip on power.
Hey there. So it took me a long time to get this video all recorded and uploaded. And unfortunately, since I recorded these words, there has been evidence coming out of Iran of a brutal and bloody crackdown, including reports of rape of children and murder of additional protesters, and also word that the protest is growing, that other sectors of Iranian society are fed up with this type of barbarism and unholy behavior coming out of supposed holy men. Anyway, I just wanted to put that in there, and back to it.
But even if the protests are snuffed out, even if the regime is able to retain power, as it may be able to do, these girls have already done something incredibly important. and they've proven to themselves that they have the power that they can take into their own hands. If nations of people are forged out of common struggle, right? If the nation of Iran 100 years ago was forged out of a struggle against foreign leaders, right? What is the nation that's being forged now in this struggle for freedom? Wow, it's exciting to think about, huh? But hey, that's gonna be it for me. You've been great. Hope to see you again next time. Until then,
I ain't got time
keep
to kiss
thinking.
you now. I'm busy with this mule.